This is going to be a little unusual for a video on my channel. I wasn't planning this, but as life intervened into my plans, I decided that I wanted to do something for a friend that I've done for many other friends and family several times over my adult life. I wanted to eulogize my friend. This week I found out that a friend of mine, whom I hadn't been close with in a few years, had decided to choose a permanent solution to a very temporary problem. Obviously, this video isn't going to have any funny drop-ins or ads playing. With that being said, I am going to do my best to give a positive immortalization of a great gamer and a good friend that we lost this week. Obviously, this is going to be my recollection, and through that lens will be unavoidably skewed towards the times that I had spent with him. In recent years, I didn't have enough interaction to know about who he had become, but I knew who he was when I was gaming with him, and that's good enough for me. So I'm not going to be asking for channel support on this video. My only request would be that if you have a loved one suffering with depression, or that you suspect one might be suffering with depression, call them, go visit them, give them a hug. Without further ado, let's get into it. My friend, whom I will refer to as Davey, I met through the hobby that I spend so much time talking about today. This was around 2008, and his future father-in-law, who was in my group at the time, had asked if Davey could join us. I said absolutely, the more the merrier. Davey had shared with me that he had always wanted to get into a D&D group, but this was his first opportunity, and he was ecstatic to give it a go. Well, give it a go he did. Davey was one of my most reliable players, and also the only player in the group to give the DM role a shot, which led him to further explore that side of the hobby in ways that I would have never imagined. But we'll get more into that later. Davey and I shared our enthusiasm for role-playing, but he also had an appreciation for another game that I had set aside many years prior, Magic the Gathering. At his suggestion, I started collecting Magic again. And before long, I was competing in local tournaments with Davey and eventually attending Star City Games 5Ks and Magic the Gathering Grand Prix events throughout the Midwest. Davey and I had a similar obsessive nature about the fine-tuning of our latest deck creations and perfecting our play to get the most out of our hobby. I had never had the pleasure of a regular playtest partner, and as such, having access to an equally serious person that would put in the time every week was a real boon for me and for my hobby, and I hope for him as well. We became fast friends through our gaming and traveled to numerous Magic the Gathering events. Alas, with his upcoming marriage and his moving into a different town to pursue further education, Davey was going to have to move on from our group as well. And as such, I wanted to give him a proper send-off with a great session. I ran a game of the Extreme Dungeon Master system that was written and published by Tracy Hickman, which I had picked up at Gen Con. Davey was absolutely fascinated that so much fun could be had with such a simple system. After Davey had moved out of the area, it was not much longer before that particular group disbanded, at my choice, but it was in reality pretty much mutual. Without him, our enthusiasm level dropped, the balance of personalities was lost, and the enjoyable banter was replaced with bickering and malaise. Luckily, Davey was still within driving distance, and we would occasionally get together for a game of Magic or to share our recent gaming purchases or pursuits. On one occasion that I remember quite well, roughly a year after our group had disbanded, Davey brought a game that I had never heard of before, and at the time, the game was relatively unknown. Dungeon World. Dungeon World captured that same spirit that Davey had found enjoyable in Extreme Dungeon Master, and he had a wonderful knack for tuning that system up to 11. He ended up publishing adventures and supplemental tools for the system, and really being a great advocate for the game in its early years. Unfortunately, our visits got further apart as time went on, and eventually I lost contact with him altogether, until I got a message from a concerned friend of his that I should reach out and get in touch with him if I could. This would be sometime around 2015. I found his faculty email at the college he was teaching and started conversing with him almost immediately. This led to a lot of great discussions that made me think, and based upon his responses, I think it caused him to think a lot as well. Davey and I still chatted about games, but we now expanded our conversations almost all in written form at this point because he was across the state and guys just don't chat on the phone a lot. Our conversations would now often come back to worldviews and cover topics like religion, morality, consciousness, and unfortunately, politics. Davey and I had always been from different worldviews in almost every way. When we met originally, I was an atheist, he was a Catholic. Maybe not practicing, but still very much raised in that world. I was mildly conservative. He was to the left of center. If I would have liked peanut butter, he most likely would have been a jelly guy. It just worked out that way pretty consistently. It was exactly because of these differences that I really enjoyed our discussions. But one thing had changed when we restarted our conversations. I had become a baptized believer, and he had moved away from the church in his own views. So despite our shifts, we remained on opposite sides of the fence. Throughout our many discussions on the world and how it worked, I got to learn about his viewpoints, and I think he learned about my own. And I always felt as though there was a mutual respect, even if we strongly disagreed upon things. As I alluded to earlier, Davey and I had found a certain amount of comfort in discussing our opposing views and strengthening our own arguments in the process. A very give and take scenario. The one conversation that ended up being too much was around a certain presidential election. I noticed that Davey was getting very angry in his social media posts, and I wanted to send a message that we were not all that far apart on goals, just on the best way to get there. I failed in my delivery, and it led to several more discussions back and forth that eventually ended up with Davey letting me know that he didn't want to discuss anything with me anymore. I obliged, and I let him know that I hoped that he found what he was looking for. I'm not sure if he took that as I intended, as at the end of our conversations, I would often mean one thing but fail miserably to express it thusly. So after about 8 years of friendship, at times meeting multiple times a week, countless dinners, and many trips to other states, we entered into a long period of complete radio silence. I had maintained in touch with Davey's father after he and I had quit conversing, as he worked in my industry and was a former co-worker. His father was good enough to share some of the different accomplishments that Davey had in his career, and shared some gaming information from a non-gamer perspective, of course. I was always glad to hear something good going on for my old friend, even though we weren't in contact. Then, at a local festival, I happened to bump into Davey's entire family, including Davey, and we did have a good, if too short, conversation about gaming. I asked if he was still playing Dungeon World, which he was not, and shared whatever game it was that I was into at the time. I can hardly remember. Then he made a suggestion. You should check out the Quest RPG, to which I was happy to oblige. As was my process at the time when researching a new game, I turned to YouTube when I got home and searched Quest RPG, and to my surprise, there was my friend Davey discussing that very RPG at length in the first video that popped up. I didn't even know that he had a YouTube channel, let alone think I'd ever randomly stop on it. In reality, it was this interaction combined with my son's interest in creating YouTube content that is the reason that this channel exists. My son's interest was the spark that drove me to action, but it was Davey's own tackling of the subject that made me realize that I could actually do it myself. I ordered up Quest, and he was absolutely correct. That game is great. I was hoping for more opportunities for interaction, but wasn't going to reach out directly as we had agreed previously on no communications. So I would regularly ask his father what he was up to as far as projects in life, and the reports were always pretty promising. Sometime last fall, around the time that my own life and career was at a pretty low point, I had spoken to Davey's father and found out that his work was being published in a new book that was on Kickstarter. I was absolutely thrilled for my old friend to be published in such a public-facing property related to gaming and in a topic that he had so much skill. I knew that he was going to have a successful campaign, and if I had the income at the time, I would have eagerly signed up for that Kickstarter. One of the many reasons that I'm going to be attending GaryCon next week was because I had hoped that Davey might be there to promote his new book, of which he was a contributor to. Perhaps I could even mend some fences while I was there. I knew from our last interaction that he was at least willing to have some discourse, and maybe I could throw a few bucks his way by pre-ordering a copy, since it was long past the campaign's end at this point. That would have been a great way for our friendship to go if one were writing a fictionalized accounting of the story. And then they went on to play many more games together and share numerous stories over the course of their long and successful journeys. But that wasn't how the story was to end. I got a text during a break at my training, one that elicited a call to confirm. You don't mean Davey, right? Yeah, yesterday, my friend had told me. Not at all what I was expecting. You see, even though Davey and I were of different viewpoints on pretty much everything, I just never thought it was possible that he would be struggling so mightily that he would make a choice that couldn't be undone. Yet that is exactly what happened. He was an absolute legend of the conversational art with a razor-sharp wit and a way with words that would be the envy of many professional writers. I'm sure that his family, his friends, and his students will all be as shocked, or likely more so, than I was when I received word that he was no longer with us. I'm coming away from this with several things that I've learned from my friend and specifically my relationship with him. First, don't risk mixing friendship with politics. Even if you start off having reasoned discussions, there are too many political pitfalls and traps to avoid to make the journey worth the destination. For gaming in particular, if you can avoid politics completely, you are generally much better off. Second, don't take for granted that you will have more opportunities to clean up damaged relationships or apologize for past infractions. I don't know if he was ever going to be at Gary Con, but one of my hopes was to see him there and make another attempt to rebuild that bridge. It's not going to happen now, but I could have easily taken the first step myself by reaching out directly. That is a risk I should have taken. Take the chance and avoid the risk of not knowing. Third, value your relationships, be they from gaming or other aspects of your life. At the end of the day, given the choice of a dragon's hoard or an opportunity to roll dice and have some light conversation with Davy, I'm taking the latter every time. Show the people you care about that you love them with the most precious resource that we have, our time. Good gaming, and God bless.